somebody like Clark comes around with a very analytical mind, he can say, I'm not just picking any word anywhere out of the Torah portion. I'm picking one of a very select few words that are found in the very beginning of the Torah portion.
Sure.
So when I look for words, sometimes, as you and I have both experienced, I went through all those obvious words and there were no matches. Oh yeah, but this little connector word.
Right.
Notice how many times it's used.
Yes,
it's
exactly.
the key word. We're looking at connections this time. So this verbal tally has guided the Chacham and myself in looking at the proper ashlamata.
It's a tried and true ancient system.
And the Chacham and I are exploring to understand how we use the other ones. He and I had a discussion this week on how the ashlamata for this coming Shabbat, which is the right one. So we know, since we're doing Vayikra 24,
right?
We know that the issue is going to probably revolve around oil.
Okay. How significant is that?
Well, if you look carefully at Leviticus chapter 23, you see it starts off with telling you about the Sabbath, and he says, these are the appointed festivals. These are the appointed times for you to rehearse prophetic events.
Okay.
And so he lists out each of the festivals in order. Pesach, Shavuot, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot. Vayikra 23, all of the festivals and Sabbath, all put together.
A neat little compendium of all of these.
We jump into Vayikra 24, and the subject is the pure oil. Not just oil, pure oil that is to be used by Aaron for the menorah. And we say, our sages have said that this is a hint to Hanukkah. Because Hanukkah, the issue was, where's the pure oil that I'm going to use to relight the menorah?
Right.
So
otherwise there wouldn't have been any miracle in this story, right? We just go get some oil and we'll fill it up. But no, we don't need just oil. We need
pure oil.
Very good.
So Hanukkah is the next festival after Sukkot. So Leviticus 23 finishes up with Sukkot, and Leviticus 24 jumps into Hanukkah.
Boy, that's got to be coincidental.
And when he's all done with Hanukkah, he talks about the table of showbread, the Shulchan. And this is an allusion to Purim, which is the next festival in order. So rather than go too far off on that tangent, all I'm saying is, here are all the festivals in order. And it's quite plain that as we looked at the Torah portion, that it was an allusion to Hanukkah, which finished up yesterday.
Right.
So we're going to read on the Shabbat, closest to Hanukkah, all about the Torah allusions to Hanukkah.
Isn't that amazing?
No, this is amazing stuff. So now we've got 5 potential ashlamatot. Which one goes with our reading? And so I sent the question to the Chacham. I said, which one are we going to use? And he comes back and he says, we're going to use this one. And I looked at it and I did my verbal tallies and I said, it works. Just because I got a while here. Let me do the verbal tallies for the other 4 and let's see how they work out.
Sure.
I was all done. I said, the one Your Eminence picked, it's got the most verbal tallies at the beginning. It's clearly the right one. So, but, if you look at this other one, it talks about olive trees. And, we get olive oil from olive trees. It seems like it. And that's one of the verbal tallies from the first two Pesukim. The Chacham says, Greg, Hillel, Your Honor, look, it's like this. If you look carefully through the rest of them, you'll see that the one I chose talks about olive oil repeatedly, and the Torah portion talks about olive oil, not so much in the first portion, but throughout. And he says, I think this is a benefit. And of course he was right.
Sure.
So we're working the details, and he and I play, how do I say, good cop, bad cop, if you will.
Sure.
We're constantly bouncing. I'm the antagonist, and he's the protagonist.
Okay, very good.
And I'm constantly asking the questions. Well, why not this one? Or, look at the advantages of this one. How can I build my argument? I got to be right sometimes. It doesn't happen, but I still think maybe sometimes I can be right.
Someday, right?
So It really works well because, as the Nazarene Codicil says, iron sharpens iron. As I provoke with my, if you will, antagonistic questions, the protagonist responds back and says, you know, Your Honor, you're looking at this portion. You should be looking at this portion.
Right.
And every time I've really actually been right, he said, it's like the lights come on, and he's ready to start telling me what's wrong, and he stops like mid-sentence, and he says,
wait a minute.
No, that's not working so well.
Wait a minute here. Okay.
And it's quite obvious when we finally hit the right places. As a guy we met down in Miami Beach said, he says the truth seems to ring true.
Very good.
It resonates with everybody around it. Dang, of course that's right. I don't need to go find a proof. It's severa. It's logical.
It's logic. Very good. It's interesting when we look, for example, at how to tie these pieces together. You talk about the verbal tallies. We haven't discussed a lot the Nazarene Codicil, but we know that if we go back through history and we look, for example, at the Mishnaic period and even the material that came up in the building of the Mishnah, the background information, etc., we know that that's the logic that even the writers of the Nazarene Codicil were accustomed to. And now it seems to be coming to light the very same thing we do with this verbal tally. We take this one word out because it's key to discussion for whatever matter, that this is exactly what the writers of the Nazarene Codicil did. It's very interesting that this week, coincidentally, of course, like all of this other stuff, that Hakam Safed decides to take this one word. It's used only by him and Hakam Shaul, and a writer that is actually of contemporary times, more or less, Philo. And he uses this word, and it actually says, if we translate it very literally, it would have to say pure light. Isn't that amazing that, you say, well, what's he thinking about when he's writing this? And so he takes this one little word, pure light, pure oil, etc., and it...
So what's the relationship between oil and light?
Very good. So we have the light from the oil. But here's the interesting thing about this word, and maybe this answers that question. If not, correct me. But with the light that Hakam Safed is using here, he's actually talking about the sun's light. Okay? So how do we know that there is a sun? Because we can see it, but how can we see the sun? Because of the sun's light. Okay? So this light, this pure light that we're talking about, what? How do we know that there's a light? How do we know it's pure light? Because we have the light to be able to see it by.
So what's the difference between the Hanukkah lights and the sun?
That's a good question.
Okay, so the Hanukkah lights, our sages have ruled, you're not allowed to use the Hanukkah lights except to look at.
Okay.
Because they represent the light of creation, not the light of the sun, the moon, and the stars, but the light of that existed. Remember, it says in the beginning, the 25th word of the Torah portion of Bereshit says, or light, let there be light. But it wasn't until the fourth day that he said, he created the sun, the moon, the stars. And he said, let them be for lights and for signs and for seasons and for months and for days and for years. So we got 3 days, doing the first day and the fourth day.
Right.
Oh, where's this light talking about in Genesis?
We don't have any light generators, so to speak, as we would call perhaps the sun, the moon, and the stars.
Now, if you think about it for a moment, we're only allowed to look at the Hanukkah, to look at the lights of the Hanukkah. Can we look at the sun?
No.
And if you do, what happens if you look at the sun?
Before too long, you won't look at the sun.
He fixes that up real quick, right? A matter of a moment or two, and pretty soon you don't have to worry about looking at the sun anymore because you can't see it no matter what. Your eyes are burned out. Okay?
Right.
So it's very interesting to see this flip-flop. Here's the light that we're supposed to use that we can't look at without killing ourselves.
Right.
Or this light that we can look at but we can't use. So you can see that what Hakam Safed is balancing is this dichotomy between these two pieces.
Sure. Very good. Good. Very good illustration. That's very good. So, and I'm sure that he was simple fisherman. He could have never figured this out.
Not a chance. Not a chance. That's a lie straight from hell. I've never heard of it.
The more I study Hakam Safed, and the triennial cycle, the more I'm convinced that it's absolutely the way. And not to negate the possibility of reading it in any other fashion, but it seems to me like if we're going to do an accurate translation of, and I'm speaking now specifically of the Nazarene Codicil, because here we're still trying to do what? Put Humpty Dumpty back together. We want to know exactly what they were thinking, what they were saying, etc. So now, having gone through this process of looking at the triennial cycle and then the Nazarene Codicil, it seems to me, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me impossible, literally, to make an authentic or validated translation without first taking into consideration all the data of the triennial cycle, those accompanying readings and all that. Because if you do make this interpretation, this translation, what have you done? You've done it from some abstract perspective, and you've actually divorced the idea from its original mechanism and content.
Sure. So
it seems to me more and more, the more that we come through this, the more accurate that all of these things are. But this guy that turned out originally in all of Christendom to be a dumb fisherman and some guy that's brash with his mouth, etc. In my mind, he's far from this individual. Far
Indeed.
from this individual.
You had a question?
Well, I want to talk about maybe one slightly other aspect of this, and that's Yeshua. I think part of the idea here is that this system existed at the time of his teachings.
Oh, absolutely.
And so the idea is that as a good rabbi, he followed this cycle, if that was the way of the land at the time, and that he would have taught on the weekly portion at that time. So part of this is kind of a literary archaeology, if you will, where we're not trying to just figure out what maybe teachers after Yeshua did, but more help in the Hebraic sense, put him more into the setting of his life at the time of his ministry.
So why did most Christians say that he lived 3.5 years as his, in his public ministry? Why?
Exactly.
Good point.
Okay, and as my rabbi says, he says he simply unrolled for one cycle of the Torah portion. And there are many traditional sources that say that Mashiach ben Yosef will precede Mashiach ben David, and maybe that's when we'll see the second portion. Others have said, well, if
the Shmita cycle, you're
correct.
Speaking, right?
Yeah, it's the second portion of the Shmita cycle. Others have said, well, Yeshua was Mashiach ben Yosef, and when he comes again as Mashiach ben David, he'll be the second portion.
Okay.
So either one of those are very, very nice to work with and help to see that there's this bimodality. They're two completely different guys, but they're the same guy.
Well, one overall mission.
Well, if you will, the mission seems to be
maybe multifaceted.
Different focus.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So he's focusing on teaching Torah and reconciling the Gentiles. When he comes back again, he is focused on teaching Torah and reconciling the Jews in a different kind of a way. He's trying to